He had a dream. A simple dream, yet one so big that it seemed impossible. From a young age, he imagined himself creating something meaningful, something that could touch hearts. But as soon as he shared this dream with the people around him, he was met with laughter and doubt. His friends smirked, his relatives shook their heads, and even some of the people he loved the most seemed to question his abilities. "You can't do this," they said. "This isn't for you." Slowly, the weight of those words began to sink into his heart. Every day, he watched other people chase their goals while he remained in the shadows. At school or at work, he tried small steps toward his dream, but every attempt seemed to fail. When he brought up his ideas, people ignored him, turning their attention elsewhere. At home, there was little encouragement. Sometimes, the silence of his family felt louder than any insult. He would sit in his room at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe he wasn't capable. Maybe his dream was just a fantasy. Yet, deep inside, a small spark refused to die. Even though the world around him doubted him, he continued. It wasn't a loud or visible effort. He didn't announce it. There were no trophies, no cheers, no recognition. He simply kept moving in silence. Every morning, before anyone else woke up, he would practice his craft. Every evening, after everyone else had gone to sleep, he would refine his skills. It was exhausting, lonely work. Sometimes, tears would flow quietly, and sometimes, frustration would make him slam his hands on the table or throw his notebook across the room. But every time, he picked himself up again. Slowly, step by step, he moved forward, even though no one was watching. The world had a way of making him feel small. People would ask him why he was wasting his time, why he wasn't doing something realistic. They compared him to others who had already succeeded, forgetting that every journey was different. He saw them celebrate small victories, while he struggled just to keep going. It would have been easy to give up, to choose comfort over the uncertain path of chasing his dream. But something inside him wouldn't allow that. A quiet voice kept whispering, "Keep going. Don't stop. This is yours." Sometimes, the loneliness was unbearable. He would look outside his window and see other people laughing together, sharing achievements, celebrating milestones, while he sat alone in a dimly lit room with only the soft sound of a piano in the background. Each note he played carried his emotions as hope, his fear, his frustration, and his determination. The music became a companion, a friend that never judged, never doubted, and never left him. Through the piano, he expressed feelings he couldn't put into words. Through the music, he gave himself the courage to continue when everything else in his world seemed to tell him to quit. He also faced ridicule. People didn't just ignore him. They mocked him. Friends told him he was wasting his life. Strangers laughed when he shared his work online. Social media, which could have been a place for encouragement, instead amplified the doubt. Comments piled up. "This isn't good enough. Why are you even trying? You'll never make it." Each word felt like a heavy stone on his chest, but each stone also pushed him to work harder, to prove, first and foremost, to himself that he could rise above the noise. Even with the pressure, he never lost sight of the dream. There were moments when despair almost took over, moments when he thought it would be easier to abandon everything. He imagined a life where he didn't have to struggle, where failure didn't sting so sharply, where the ridicule of others didn't feel like fire burning his confidence. But he also knew something essential: if he gave up now, he would never forgive himself. The dream, no matter how distant it seemed, was still alive inside him. It was fragile, yes, but persistent, and that persistence was stronger than any doubt around him. The nights were the hardest. The world was quiet, but his mind raced. He would lie awake, thinking about the mistakes he had made, the opportunities he had lost, and the countless times people had told him to give up. Yet, even in those dark hours, he found a strange sense of clarity. He realized that everyone who doubted him was, in a way, irrelevant to his journey. Their opinions didn't define his worth. Their laughter didn't determine his future. Only his actions, persistence, and belief in himself mattered. And so, he continued, even when no one applauded, even when no one noticed, even when it felt like the whole world was against him. During this part of his journey, he learned small lessons about resilience. He learned that failure was not the opposite of success, it was a part of it. Every mistake, every misstep, every rejection was teaching him something valuable. He started observing himself closely, understanding his strengths, his weaknesses, and his true potential. The quiet moments alone with his piano became a source of reflection and growth. Every note he played was more than music hit, was a step toward mastering himself, preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. By the end of this part, the audience should feel the weight of his isolation and the depth of his struggle. They should understand his pain, his doubts, and the relentless effort he invests in silence. They should feel empathy for him, admiration for his determination, and a subtle hope that maybe, just maybe, his story is far from over. This is the foundation of the journey, the point where the audience connects with him emotionally and roots for him to rise above the obstacles that have kept him in the shadows for so long. The music should reflect this progressive, melancholic piano in the beginning, slowly layering with more notes to show a subtle spark of hope. Visuals could include dimly lit rooms, empty streets at night, hands on the piano keys, journals filled with scribbles, and fleeting moments of longing and frustration. By the end of this section, the audience should feel both the weight of his struggle and the faint flicker of his determination. He thought that once he started, things would get easier. That hard work alone would be enough to move him forward, but the world proved him wrong. Every day brought new challenges, new failures, and new moments of doubt. What he thought were small obstacles turned into mountains he had to climb alone. The people around him continued to ignore him, often questioning why he was still trying. Why do you even bother? They would ask. You're wasting your time. At first, he let their words cut deep, letting frustration and despair settle into his mind like a shadow. But slowly, he learned something important, that the noise of others did not determine his worth. Every attempt he made seemed to fall short. He would start a project with excitement, pouring every ounce of energy he had into it, only to see it fail. Sometimes it was a small mistake, a forgotten detail, or a timing issue. Other times, it was a major setback, something completely out of his control. And with each failure, the sting of disappointment grew sharper. He began to question himself more often, asking silently if maybe he truly wasn't the good enough. But even in the face of repeated failure, he refused to give up completely. That tiny spark of determination inside him refused to die, no matter how cold the world became. He spent hours practicing, refining, learning, and failing again. His life became a cycle of relentless effort, often without any recognition or reward. People would walk by and notice nothing. Friends stopped calling. Relatives ignored him, and strangers dismissed his attempts. Social media, which could have been a platform for encouragement, was instead full of criticism. Each negative comment felt like a punch to the stomach. You'll never make it. This isn't good enough. Why are you even trying? The words piled up, building a weight so heavy that sometimes he could barely move. Yet, instead of stopping, he learned to use the weight to push himself harder. There were days when he cried alone, sitting in a dimly lit room with nothing but his piano and his thoughts. He wondered if it was all worth it. He imagined a life where he didn't have to fight so hard, where success came easier, where people didn't doubt him constantly. But even in those moments of despair, he found a stubborn part of himself that refused to quit. He reminded himself that no one else would ever fight for his dreams, like he could. If he gave up now, he would never forgive himself. So he took a deep breath, wiped his tears, and tried again. The loneliness became both a challenge and a teacher. In the quiet, he learned to observe his own mind, understanding his fears, doubts, and motivations. He realized that the failures were not signs of weakness, but lessons that were shaping him into someone stronger. Every setback taught him something new: how to approach a problem differently, how to manage frustration, how to stay focused despite distractions. His piano, which had once been a companion in sadness, became a tool for reflection and healing. Each note he played was like a conversation with himself, a reminder that he was still capable, still learning, still moving forward. During this period, he experienced ridicule from people he once trusted. Friends mocked him, strangers criticized him, and even family sometimes questioned why he didn't choose a safer path. These moments hurt more than failures alone because they struck at the core of his confidence. But he began to understand that the opinions of others were not his reality. They could not define his talent, his effort, or his journey. He started to filter out the noise, focusing only on the small victories he achieved in private. A note played perfectly, a practice completed, a small idea executed. These were the signs of progress that mattered, even if no one else noticed. He also began to realize the importance of consistency. Success would not come in a single moment of brilliance. It would come through countless hours of unseen work, through repeated failures, and through the persistence of someone unwilling to stop. Some days, he felt like a failure, but he refused to let that feeling dominate him. Instead, he treated each day as a step forward, no matter how small. Every practice session, every attempt, every failure was a brick in the foundation of the person he was becoming. Sometimes, the struggle felt like an endless storm. He would wake up, exhausted from the day before, and still face challenges that seemed insurmountable. The emotional toll was immense. There were nights when he felt completely broken, questioning why he had chosen this path at all. But even in those nights, he would return to the piano. The music became a voice for his heart, a way to release the pain that words could not express. The melody carried his frustration, his hope, and his determination, turning raw emotion into something beautiful. Despite the relentless difficulties, small moments of hope began to appear. Sometimes a practice session went well, and he could feel progress in his skills. Sometimes a stranger would notice his effort online and offer a kind word. These small sparks were enough to remind him that he was on the right path. They weren't trophies or applause, but they were signs that his persistence had meaning. Every small success, every minor breakthrough, fueled him to continue the fight against the endless doubts and obstacles. He began to develop resilience in a way he never imagined. Each failure no longer crushed him completely. Instead, it became a lesson, a challenge to overcome. He learned patience, understanding the results often take time, and that effort without immediate recognition still mattered. His mind grew stronger, able to withstand criticism, setbacks, and the weight of isolation. He became his own support system, his own motivator, his own cheerleader. And slowly, the fire inside him began to burn brighter than the doubts surrounding him. Through all of this struggle, he also learned to embrace imperfection. He realized that mistakes were not signs of failure, but steps toward mastery. Each error revealed something he didn't know, something he could improve upon. Instead of fearing mistakes, he started to see them as opportunities. The piano lessons that went wrong, the projects that failed, the attempts that fell short, they're all essential chapters in his story. And each chapter, no matter how painful, was making him stronger, preparing him for the moments when his perseverance would finally pay off. By the end of this period, the audience should feel the weight of his strict loneliness, the criticism, the repeated failures. They should see that he is human, vulnerable, and flawed, but also incredibly determined. They should feel both empathy and admiration, rooting for him even as he continues to fight unseen battles. This part of the story is critical because it sets the emotional foundation for the transformation that is yet to come. Without understanding the depth of his struggle, the audience will not fully appreciate the triumph that awaits him. The piano should reflect this journey song. Melancholic melodies for the moments of doubt, slow, heavy notes for the deepest struggles, and subtle hints of uplifting chords to foreshadow hope. Visuals could include dimly lit practice rooms, close-ups of his hands on the piano keys, journals filled with scribbled ideas, empty streets at night, and small, quiet victories that hint at the persistence and resilience growing within him. By the end of this part, the audience should feel emotionally invested, sensing both the weight of his challenges and the growing determination that will carry him forward. He had a dream. From the earliest days of his life, he imagined himself creating something meaningful, something that could touch hearts and leave a mark on the world. It was a dream that felt larger than life, yet simple in its essence, a dream that only he could truly understand. When he shared this dream with those around him, their reactions were not of encouragement, but of doubt. Friends smirked, relatives shook their heads, and even people he loved the most seemed uncertain of his ability. "You can't do this," they said. "This isn't for you." Each word sank into his heart, heavy and persistent, making him question the value of his aspirations. Despite the voices of doubt, he tried to move forward. Every day, he would take small steps toward his dream, quietly, without announcement or recognition. At school, at work, or at home, he practiced and worked in silence. But no matter how hard he tried, the world seemed indifferent. People ignored his efforts or mocked them. Sometimes, Even family members dismissed his ideas as foolish or unrealistic. The silence was deafening, the indifference crushing. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe the dream he cherished was impossible. But deep inside, a tiny spark refused to die, a stubborn flicker of hope that whispered, "Keep going, no matter what." His days were a cycle of effort and disappointment. He would pour himself into his craft, dedicating hours to practice, learning, and refining his skills. Yet, the results seemed invisible. Friends stopped noticing him. Strangers online dismissed his work, and even the occasional words of criticism felt like knives cutting into his confidence. Social media, rather than a platform of encouragement, amplified the doubt. Comments like, "This isn't good enough," or "Why are you even trying?" appeared constantly. Each word was a weight on his chest. Yet strangely, each weight pushed him to try harder, to prove, first and foremost, to himself that he could rise above the noise. Loneliness became his constant companion. He would look out of his window at people laughing, celebrating, achieving, while he sat alone with nothing but the soft sound of piano keys beneath his fingers. Music became his friend, his confidant, his lifeline. Every note he played carried the depth of his emotions: hope, fear, frustration, and determination. Through music, he spoke when words failed, expressing everything he felt yet could not show. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a mirror reflecting his soul, a sanctuary where he could pour out pain and transform it into beauty. Failures piled up like stones on a mountain he had to climb. Projects that he believed in fell apart. Opportunities he had waited for slipped away. Small mistakes and external setbacks seemed to multiply, testing his patience and endurance. But in the quiet of his room, he learned something invaluable. Persistence mattered more than applause. Even when the world ignored him, he could continue. Every failure became a lesson, every mistake a teacher, guiding him toward a stronger version of himself. There were nights when despair almost consumed him. He would cry silently, overwhelmed by the weight of expectations, the ridicule of others, and the distance between his dream and reality. Financial struggles added to the pressure. Bills piled up, and every failed attempt reminded him of how far he still had to go. He questioned his abilities, wondering if he had chosen the right path, if perhaps he was chasing a fantasy. Yet, amidst the tears and the doubt, a small voice whispered, reminding him why he began this journey. The love for his dream, the connection he felt to his craft, was stronger than any external discouragement. That spark became his anchor, his reason to stand up again. In the depth of solitude, he found clarity. The people who doubted him, who laughed at him, were no measure of his worth. Their opinions did not define his abilities, and their laughter did not determine his future. He embraced the pain and loneliness as part of his journey. The nights spent alone, the failures, the ridiculed day were shaping him, teaching him resilience, patience, and self-belief. Each tear, each sigh, each quiet struggle became a brick in the foundation of his character, building someone stronger than he was yesterday. Through his relentless practice, he learned to appreciate imperfection. Mistakes were no longer defeats, they were steps forward. Each wrong note on the piano, each failed project, each rejection became a guide, showing him what to improve, what to focus on next. Slowly, his confidence began to rebuild, quietly but surely. The small successes, the private victories in the shadows, became more meaningful than any recognition he had ever hoped for from others. He began to understand that growth was internal, and self-belief was the real measure of achievement. Even in the moments of extreme doubt, he started noticing subtle progress. A melody played flawlessly, a rhythm perfected, a small idea executed successfully. These were signs that he was moving forward, even when no one else saw. Each day, he invested effort into becoming better than the day before, and each evening, he reflected on the lessons learned. The journey, no matter how lonely or painful, was gradually shaping him into someone capable of handling greater challenges. There came a point when the struggle became almost unbearable. He had poured everything into his dream, yet the results remained elusive. Nights felt longer, silencio llovía, and hope seemed fragile. He asked himself repeatedly if it was worth it. Was this relentless pursuit of something uncertain truly his path? Could he survive the weight of disappointment and criticism? And yet, in the darkest moments, he refused to surrender. The fire inside, though faint, burned on. He realized that the lowest point was not a place to quit, was a place to grow. Every struggle had taught him resilience. Every setback had shaped his patience, and every moment of doubt had strengthened his resolve. Slowly, he began to rise again. He approached his craft with renewed focus, dedicating every hour to practice, learning, and improvement. Failures still occurred, but now they were lessons, not crushing defeats. He embraced them, analysed, Tim, and used them as fuel. The piano, once a companion in sadness, became a symbol of his determination, a way to channel pain into purpose. Each note, each chord, carried a part of his journey, turning frustration into focus and despair into determination. His confidence grew. Every small victory, no matter how minor, felt monumental because it was earned through struggle. The world might not yet recognize him, but he had begun to recognize himself. The journey that once seemed impossible became a series of small steps, each one taking him closer to his goal. He learned that perseverance mattered more than applause, that belief in oneself was stronger than the judgment of others, and that the journey itself was more valuable than any destination. Eventually, the quiet victories accumulated. His skills sharpened, his determination deepened, and his resilience became unbreakable. The people who had doubted him began to notice the change, though he no longer sought their approval. His triumph was not in their recognition, but in the knowledge that he had refused to quit, that he had endured, and that he had grown stronger than ever before. The piano echoed this transformation. Melodies that once carried sorrow now wove hope and strength, creating music that was both powerful and deeply emotional. Finally, the moment came. People noticed, applauded, and acknowledged his talent. The very ones who had doubted him now watched as he stood tall, proud, and confident. Yet, he felt a deeper truth. He didn't need their validation anymore. The applause was sweet, but unnecessary. The real triumph was internal to strength, resilience, and belief in himself that he had cultivated through every hardship, every failure, and every lonely night. The journey had transformed him completely. The loneliness, the ridicule, the setbacks, and the pain had all contributed to a man who could face challenges without fear. He had learned that perseverance and self-belief were more important than external recognition. And as he played the piano one final time, letting every note carry a story, he smiled not for the applause, but for the journey he had survived, for the dream he had never abandoned, and for the person he had become. Tiadens, having followed his journey from doubt to determination, from despair to triumph, is left with a powerful message. Success is not measured by the applause of others, but by the courage to persist when the world says you cannot. Belief in oneself, resilience through struggle, and the quiet strength of persistence are the true rewards of any journey. And in the soft, emotional notes of the piano, the story echoes long after the final chord fades, leaving a lingering inspiration in every heart that listens.